Today we're going to talk about composition. As you can see, the essential question is, how can the rule of thirds be used for drawing to create strong compositions? I also want you to note the composition Cornell notes that are in the bottom right. It's always a good idea to take some notes while we are discussing the intro for each assignment so that you not only know what to do, but will be prepared for any quizzes that come from this information as well, because you can use your notes on the quiz. The learning targets for this assignment are: I understand the rule of thirds and can apply it in a drawing or composition that uses the whole picture plane or piece of paper. The second learning target is I understand the differences in drawing media and will work toward applying them with strong craftsmanship skill or neatness. I will use all the requirements from page 19 in this presentation to create a unique drawing. The strong work Venn diagram, as you can see here, explains how to create strong artwork. So you would utilize the elements and principles of design that we've already talked about, as well as experimenting with media and techniques, which are the skills you're going to learn in class. And then you're going to have some sort of communicated idea or cultural commentary that you're going to have in your artwork that makes it the most strong. Additionally, we need to talk about the design process. Right now we are in the think mode. Eventually we will be in the making mode, and then we will do critiques to improve what we are working on. So technically, designing is a cyclical process that you have to go through, and you may have to rework an area in order to improve it. Another thing that we'll be doing for our digital portfolios is comparing our work to a resource artist. There is a list linked here, and there is also a link in each module to the 2D resource artists that you can use to compare your work to. Remember, the work does not have to be exactly the same as yours. You are comparing and contrasting things. So you're comparing things that are similar and contrasting things that are different. In each assignment, you'll get to choose what type of media you're going to use. For this particular assignment, you can use Photoshop, Procreate, chalk pastels, oil pastels, or ebony pencil. So now here's a question. I'm wondering if you can tell me what other courses use the word composition. If you said English, music, or science, you were correct. Media refers to the materials that you use to create drawings. These are things like graphite pencils, charcoal, colored pencils, pastels, which are chalk and oil pastels, markers, and gouache. There are several others that aren't listed here, but this is what we could list on the slide. There are 4 steps to the drawing process. What do you think they are? We're going to go over the 4-step drawing process now. So the first step, as you can see here, is seeing. It means you're observing the object for an extended period of time to really see all the details and compare the shapes and sizes of things. And as you can see, that moves us into step number 2, which is shape finding. Shape finding means you're going to look at angles and negative spaces, and again, you're going to compare the sizes and shapes of one part of that object with other objects around it in order to draw things proportionally. Technically, steps 1 and 2 are done simultaneously, and your instructor may often call this blocking in when you are doing that. You should actually, when you're blocking in, be drawing very lightly as well. The third step in the 4-step drawing process is major value changes. That means you're creating values within the things that you draw. As you can see here, this person was using black, white, and gray. So technically the value changes can be black, white, and the infinite number of grays between. That is technically the definition of value. However, when you use color, there are different values within color as well, and we will talk about those in the coming assignments. Another thing that I want you to notice about major value changes is that is going to be the longest part of the drawing process. As you can see here, there were 7 steps before this person got to the final version of their bird with the shadow underneath it. It's going to take you a while, several class periods, in order to create the values in your drawings. The very final step, or step number 4, is details. Things like the feathers on the bird, or the line between the beak, or the tiny details in the feet, possibly the shadow underneath. Now moving on to the rule of thirds. When you're trying to draw a composition, you're normally going to place the emphasis, or the object that your eye goes to first in a piece of artwork, somewhere on the page. Trained artists know that you do not put the emphasis in the middle of the page. You technically want to put the emphasis on one of the intersections of the tic-tac-toe board you can see on the left. So it would be one of these intersections where the emphasis normally would go. However, it's also in photography considered good to have the emphasis on all three of one part of a side. So for example, the lighthouse in this other image is technically the emphasis, and it is placed well in the rule of thirds because it's all the way over on the right. However, in drawing, we want to actually fill the page. So we are going to work on that more as we create our drawings. So I'm just wondering if in your head you can kind of summarize what we've learned so far about composition. So I want you to just kind of think about the rule of thirds and all those value steps we had talked about, or the 4-step drawing process, the different medias that we could potentially use, and other things that we've learned already. Moving on, the next thing that we need to talk about are thumbnail sketches. You will be required to draw at least 2 of the thumbnail sketches. I normally suggest you do 5. However, with the creation of cell phones, we can take rapid thumbnail sketches by putting the camera in different angles, above and below an object, or zooming in on an object, and it actually helps us create thumbnail sketches much faster. However, you still should draw a box in your sketchbook and actually experiment with how you're drawing that out to make sure that you can draw the shapes that you're seeing from what you took on your cell phone. Why do you think artists create thumbnail sketches before they start working? If you thought to yourself, it's to plan out what I'm doing, you are correct. If you thought to yourself, it's to save money on art materials since art materials are expensive, you were also correct. Great job. So we need to talk about the requirements for this first assignment. As you can see, there are several. You will have to create an area of emphasis and movement, as well as contrast. Notice you also need to use the rule of thirds, fill the whole page, and try to create a work that is unusual or unique in some way. I did not leave out number 4 on accident. I actually wanted to talk about that last. You really need to find something that's personal that you love so that drawing is fun for you. When we talk about emphasis, the emphasis is the area of the drawing where your eye goes to first. So for example, in this leaf drawing, you should actually see the drop of water on the leaf first. Then your eye is going to move around the composition because of the curvilinear nature of the leaf edge that you are seeing and the fact that it's diagonal on the page. Again, if we're talking about movement, it's the path your eye follows as you look at a piece of artwork. The image on the left is another M.C. Escher. It's called The Puddle. And what you should see first is the puddle, possibly with the trees reflected in it because it's reflecting the sky above. But then you'll also notice the tire tracks and footprints in the mud that are around it. And again, notice how he used the entire page to create his composition. As we're talking about movement, we also need to talk about the diagonals that exist here. What's really interesting about this drawing is that the tire tracks and those foot treads are going in a diagonal direction. The diagonals and the puddle help move your eye around the composition because they are not horizontal lines. I'm not saying you can't use horizontal lines, but diagonal lines are best. Another thing that we need to talk about is using contrast. As you can see here, these are 2 examples of drawings that used value to create the portraits that you see. However, the one on the right is much easier to see because there's enough contrast between different parts of the face and hair to really see a lot more of the face. There is one area toward the top right that's a little hard to see where her head ends from the background. But if you notice on the one on the left, there's many areas in the hair, from the hair to the background again, that are not as evident. And another area to look at on the one on the left is between the hand and the shoulder. It's kind of hard to see there and the right side of the nose. So what you'll see, hopefully, is that when you have stronger differences in the values that you have, it's much easier to see different areas of your drawing. You don't always have to use value to create contrast. Here the person used different value techniques such as scumbling in the mountains that you see in the ocean and smudgy values in the clouds and a little bit in the sand as well. This was technically created with Photoshop, so this person also used different opacities and colors as they were creating their drawing. So there are technically 5 ways to create value. I'm wondering if you can name any of them. Moving on, the 5 different value techniques are smudging, which means using your finger or tissue to rub or blend the value onto the piece of paper. Notice you can use a tissue, an eraser, a blending stump, your finger, anything basically to smudge or rub the value to create the value onto the paper. The second one is line rendering. Notice you're using parallel lines. It would not matter if the lines are vertical, horizontal, or diagonal as long as the lines are parallel. The third value technique is cross-hatching, so it's using perpendicular lines to create value. What you should notice about that one is that the farther the lines are apart, the lighter the value is. That works the same way with line rendering as well. The closer the lines are together, the darker the value is going to be. Value technique number 4 is pointillism or stippling. It's using dots to create value. It's technically what's done with your TVs and in any print, which are magazines or books or anything like that. The printers that we use in the classroom print with dots also. What you need to realize is as a human being, it takes the longest to create stippling because we are not printing at the same speed that a printer would. So I would potentially tell you to stay away from stippling unless you are painting because it's easiest to create stippled areas with a paintbrush. Technique number 5 is called scumbling. It's technically using the side of your pencil or scribbling to create value. And hopefully you can see the farther apart the different marks are, the lighter the value is. The closer those marks are together, the darker the area is. Another thing that you need to think about as you're creating your drawings are how to make marks so that you can really see the objects that you're drawing. This particular drawing shows a pig in grass, and then there's a sky in the background. What I want you to see is that the sky is horizontal marks, the grass are vertical marks, and the pig is going in a spherical, technically the direction is going all the way around the pig's head, and it's following the form of the head, which is why you're seeing it in that spherical nature. And all of those different mark making techniques allow you to see the different areas of the pig from the grass, and then again from the grass to the sky. Another thing that you should consider when you're trying to create drawings is an unusual viewpoint. This will be easier for natural artists, but it can be taught as well. So for example, on this image that you see here, the person had the camera underneath the person, which is why they're almost looking up their nose, which is really unusual because most people don't take pictures that direction. But having a really low point of view or a really high point of view is something we want to think about using when you are trying to create your compositions because it will make the viewpoint more unusual right off the bat. So here's what I was talking about again. If you're thinking about an ant or a mouse eye view, that upper image on the right is technically an ant or a mouse. So it's a 3-point perspective drawing where the foot of the person looks really huge and then the head of the person, which is in the upper right part of that composition, and it's really hard to see because it's really small, but it's again from an ant point of view. So you're on the road in New York City and you're looking up into the sky. As opposed to the second image, which is on the left, you can actually see the person's head better and their feet are really tiny. Again, it's a 3-point perspective drawing, but what you're seeing is from an eagle eye view. The last image that's on the right is actually zoomed in or with a microscope, and technically what you're seeing there are water or air particles moving through the cells of a leaf. So think back to what we were talking about before. Why is mark making and an unusual viewpoint necessary when we are creating drawings? If you thought to yourself, it's because it will capture someone's attention, you were correct. Okay, so when we were talking about blocking in before, technically when you're blocking in, you are going to draw the outlines of the objects that you are drawing. Sometimes it's including a couple of the details inside as well, but you want to be careful with that because that can get in the way of the value. This particular drawing is technically a contour line drawing. They drew this entire piece with one line without picking up their pen or pencil from the paper. When you're blocking in, as we had discussed before, you want to do that very, very lightly so that it's easy to correct mistakes. If you are very heavy-handed when you try to block in your drawing, you're going to have problems erasing and you may have to start over. It's always recommended that you watch the videos about how to do anything in class. So here you can see there's a video about blocking in a thumbnail sketch and using a grid to draw. Additionally, you may want to print out the idea that you're doing. What you will have to do that is you'll have to put your images in Google Drive just as the JPEG or the file themselves. Do not place them in a Google Doc. You have to have them just as the file themselves in Google Drive in order to print. What you'll have to do then is go into the back of the room where you can see the two computers. You'll have to download your image from Google Drive and then print it with one of the printers that is available in the classroom. You could then trace your images into your sketchbook with a light table or using the windows in the classroom. And again, there are some videos on how to do that. You can also watch a video about how to create contrast in your drawing. We do talk about it a little bit here, but the video might explain it a little bit better for you. So one other thing I want to talk to you about are some pen and ink techniques. Hopefully you can see here, when you use different techniques, you can actually create different textures within your work. As you are creating this first composition, I'm not asking you to draw a human or to draw an animal. You could actually use shapes and fill them with different colors or black and white textures in order to create the contrast for your piece. It does not have to represent something physical on Earth. It could just be shapes that you're connecting together, but you want to, again, think about how you're creating that emphasis and how you're creating the contrast. You don't have to use value if value is something you haven't done before. We are going to learn that next. Here are some examples of the piece in process. You can see the person drew their outlines first, then they started coloring in different sections. They did the raspberries first, then they added the color for the blueberries, and then they actually did the containers and what the containers were sitting on at the end. This example was done in Photoshop, but again, you could do this with the materials that are in the classroom as well. Another example of well done is right here. Yes, there are some negative spaces on the left and the right of the kitten, as well as underneath the keyboard of the piano. But what you're seeing here is you can definitely see each part of the kitten. Parts of it are darker so that it really stands out. And then you can also see those black keys. Because they are totally filled in, they stand out from the other keys. What might have been nice on this one is if the person had added some color, they could have actually added the color of the piano, perhaps a darker brown up here, a lighter brown down here to show where the light is hitting the piano. Or for example, a lighter brown here, a darker brown as it moves over to the right, as you can tell that the light source is kind of on the upper right, the way that the person did the value on the cat. That would have actually made this piece a little bit stronger. Here's another example of well done. This person drew the image on the right first, and it was kind of hard to see the person's hair and the bubbles. But when the person created the purple background, you can see how they can actually see they've fallen into some water, and it's much easier to see with the purple in the background. Now again, this was done in Photoshop, which it's much easier to change things in the background if you try to do that. You could use the tablets in the room for that as well. To check your work, you'll need to look at your work from 5 to 10 feet away. This means you need to pin it up in the classroom or put it on one of the countertops and walk away from it. I would suggest not looking at it as you walk away, turning around and then looking at it so you can really see whether or not you can see each object from the objects around it. If there are any areas you can't see, That is what you have to improve before you turn your work in as the final version. As we talked about earlier, you're going to need to take process photos for your digital submission of your portfolio. Here you can see the person took pictures while they were blocking in and as they started adding color in order to see each different part of their piece. The final version was underneath this. It's not in this video. As we also talked about before, you have to compare your work to a resource artist. You'll need to include the name of the artist, an image of the work that they produced, and compare and contrast how your piece is similar or different from what was created. All right, so pretend that a friend of yours was absent from class today. What are the things that you learned about composition from this presentation? I'm going to give you a minute to discuss, and then we are going to move on to the next part of class for today.